gosh, there's so much I want to say and so much I feel like we shouldn't at this moment.
I apologize.
No, it's good. Yeah, I feel like there's so much wrong with that worldview. Although I also, like, at one time adopted it and agreed and have points that I agree with. And I also, like, part of the reason I wanted to talk about beauty is, like, especially when I first came out of Christianity, like, I wept at Christmas and Easter. And I still find the story of, God, more the children's storybook Bible, the one that Keller, like, endorses. I think that's what it's called. Where it's, each story has this overarching theme of, like, God's coming to your rescue. You're going to be rescued. You're going to be rescued. Like, I do find that idea beautiful. In some ways. Yeah, I think partly where I'm like, is this idea that, like, Jesus has to make us feel like we don't or can't reach this standard that God sets. And I'm like, well, why? Like, if we're taking the whole story as either literally or metaphorically true, like, why couldn't God in the beginning have given us the ability to follow the standard with which, so that we could just be like Jesus? Like, why set up this, like, dichotomy? And I guess, Christians are going to say, well, we had free will in the fall and this and that. And like, you put the fruit in the garden. How about you just don't do that? Or how about you don't punish Eve for being curious and wanting knowledge of good and evil? And how can you judge someone for doing something that ends up being wrong if they don't have knowledge of good and evil? And I know we're getting a little bit into more apologetics, but, like,
no, it's just good. Well, this goes back to what I was saying about the subtlety between toxicity and truth.
Sure.
And language, because we the way we talk about what sin is really important, and it's a loaded term. So when I say sin, people who grew up Catholic in the modern world or grew up conservative Protestant in the modern world, I think the way they think of it, and I'm probably going to say this, and people are going to go, "Is there another way to think of it?" But it's a transgression. Here's righteousness. Here's unrighteousness. You did the thing that was unrighteous. Where I think sin is easily observable and obvious and right in front of our face, it's the observation that we all are able to make. We look out into the world and we go, not great. And we look into ourselves, and sometimes we see ourselves lash out with emotion rather than, like, the right thing. And we look back on the way that we treated that person or the motives with which we did the thing, and we're like, that's not helping. So the imperfection I think is clear. And I get the baggage of the whole standard motif, because I think coming from a Calvinistic point of view, they apply that to the law, which is interesting to me. They apply that idea to the Mosaic Law as if God gave the Mosaic Law for the rhetorical purpose of showing people that they were imperfect. Whereas what I think Jesus reveals is that the law doesn't do that even well enough. In other words, there were people, and the Apostle Paul even... Hi, Bash.
I don't know if they can hear that. But
I don't know.
I can. Something just toppled in the other room.
The Apostle Paul even admits, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, a Pharisee of the Pharisees. Like, I was able to do this. Like, I kept the law.
Well, to be fair, yeah, never mind.
I guess the difference of perspective is that I don't look at Jesus's, raising the bar, so to speak, as a way of him needing to prove to us how desperately wicked we are. I look at it as there's something beyond human goodness to which we can aspire. Does that make sense? Is that different? Qualitatively?
I think it is different, and it does make sense. And just to reassure the viewers or listeners, that was just Beyblades that my kid dumped out, so it's fine. He's playing with them. Yeah. Yes, it makes sense. I think that there'll be some backlash on, views of sin, maybe that you've expanded here, where it isn't just a moral failing, but like something's not right with the world, and something's not right with me internally, potentially too, because I'm not fixing. Because I think all of us can look out in the world and be like, "Wow, it's not right," and then people are like, "Well, donate to this cause, give your time," and you're like, right? Like part of the critique of social justice warriors is like, it's really easy to tweet or post something when something big happens. It's really hard to like go protest where you might get beaten, or like give sacrificially of your money, or leave your family for a night so that you can, go work at a homeless shelter. And
it's like this. We all complain about the world being not what it should be, and then we get in our car at 7:30 in the morning to drive down to our friend's house to do a podcast, knowing that the world is dying because of fossil fuels. And I don't think it's just, obviously there's a bigger subject there,
sure.
But like you get the analogy. Maybe it's better to say, we all rationalize and we say to ourselves, you know what? I worked really hard today. I deserve this 3 hours from 8 to 11 to watch this movie that I want. I'm not going to expend that energy in service to others. I need this for self-care, right? And what I'm saying is those 3 hours where you decide to do your 3 hours of self-care, I'm not going to judge you for that. But we all seem to share this conscience where we do that and we go, you know what? I could have spent those 3 hours protesting against racism, right? And it's that sort of like, I'm not Jesus. I'm not Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not, St. Francis or whatever sort of saint or activist. I'm not these people where you realize the standard for being good, the standard for changing the world, which is what Jesus did, one of many in the history of the world. Like to be that kind of person requires something that seems almost not human, something that seems superhuman. And I think what Jesus is saying is, if you really want it, you have the potential to go there through me. And I think he's the inspiration for that sacrifice that very few people end up making. And then there's the rest of us.
Yeah, I think that's... I think you're doing a good job of explaining your position and why you think it's beautiful. It's still, there's there's something to me I can't quite articulate. I should have done more research. I feel like you do on the second episode where I brought up all these verses.
Right. Right.
I didn't prepare adequately.
I tried to mitigate that by writing a post.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have wrote it a couple days before instead of the day before.
No. I also don't think it's necessarily bad for me to be caught off guard.
Yeah.
Or not have fully formed rebuttals, so to speak, because this is supposed to be more of your time.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, so we don't do another hour and 6 minute did you want to sort of fit in the burial and resurrection into this beauty before? Because I think you got to it on your Facebook post, and I think you got to it a little bit, but we got sort of sidetracked here on what it is to fully empty yourself, things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't want our listeners to sort of think that you're on this ultra progressive, like Jesus is a model rather than Jesus is. Yeah. And I mean, you said straight up like Jesus is co-eternal with God and part of a Trinity without saying that in so many words. But I don't know if you want to.
So Jesus' death, as I understand it. But by the way, like I know that there's people out there that think that there's a million theories of the atonement.
Sure.
Right. And not a million, but there's more than 5.
Yeah.
And one of them is penal substitutionary atonement.
Right.
Which is the one that I think most conservative Protestants, like you were formerly, are familiar with. Jesus died in my place. For my sins. And I don't hold to that theory of the atonement, and there are probably some people that can't imagine a gospel where that isn't the atonement theory. But and so for that they might think I'm progressive or a heretic. But let their judgments be what they are. I think Jesus died as a sinner. The paradox is that the one who was imperfect still died like the rest of us died, and in that way divinely redeemed our own death. It made death an opportunity for redemption, and then resurrection was that opportunity. When Jesus rose from the dead, he conquered the grave, but he didn't bypass death. And so because God died, if God dies, everybody does, right? There's a logic to that. It's like God didn't come to earth to say, death, you're just going to live like Bilbo Baggins, who has the ring, or Gollum, like you're going to die, because even I experienced that with you, and defined that as a part of the human experience, because that's what Jesus does, is define the human experience. But then also coupled with that is the fact that if I'm accepting death as a part of the human experience, and I'm defining the human experience as Jesus, then if I rise from the dead, that's also part of the human experience. And so resurrection is an unconditional part of the human story, and that's what our hope is. But that requires faith, because what if it's not true? I think anything where you go, what if it's not true? You're opening the question for faith. So I believe that we all pass through death, and we are, and our existence as Christians is explained by our belief in resurrection. So that is, we are free from having to pursue immortality, in like the immortality of fame or wealth or riches or notoriety. We're free from having to pursue all of that. We can believe in like the everyday good deeds that human beings can do because of and in Jesus Christ. We can believe in that because we know that there is a resurrection. We know that death is not the end of the story, and so we don't. I think we are beyond what I would call survivalism, and so resurrection can give courage to martyrdom for those who even choose to pursue it, because they're not pursuing martyrdom in the same way that say Maximus from Gladiator is pursuing immortality. We believe that like a good deed, like an extra tip at Mocha Joe's or whatever, is noticed in eternity because Jesus lives, and so we will, not because we gave a bigger tip, but simply because Jesus is risen.
My thoughts when you're talking about your view of the atonement sound much more like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis than